Hello everyone and welcome to this video. And today we're talking about Glin Industrial School in Glin in County Limerick, one of the most notorious of all the industrial schools in Ireland. And I have with me here Thomas Wall. Thomas spent 13 years of his young life within that institution. And Tom's book, maybe you've already seen it, The Boy from Glin Industrial School. It's on Amazon. And Tom gives his whole story in that book. A very sad, very harrowing story, Tom.
Yeah.
But it has to be got out there and it has to be told.
Yes.
So a few things about Glin, first of all, before Tom tells his story. You're very welcome, Tom. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to hearing what you're going to say.
Perfect.
Glin was built on the site of an old workhouse in 1928 and it closed in 1966. And you were admitted there in 52, isn't that right, Thomas? You were admitted in 52 and you spent the next 13 years of your life there and you were just 3 years of age.
Yes.
I have here a document from the files of the Christian Brothers in the handwriting of one of the brothers and with the number 2656. That was Tom's number in Glin Industrial School. He was admitted on the 20, where is this now? He was discharged in 65, 13 years after he was admitted. And the reason he was admitted was his mother, with what charge? It says destitute, not an orphan, his mother being unable to support him. His mother was called Josie Wall, and she collapsed on the road and was brought to the workhouse in Newcastle West. And Tom was born in the workhouse. And the workhouse later became his Edith's home in Newcastle West in County Limerick. There's the official document from the Christian Brothers Ledger for Tom Wall, boy number 2656 in Glin Industrial School. Now, Glin Industrial School, let me quote for you from the Ryan Commission 2009, their report on Glin Industrial School, the industrial school where Tom was sent to. This is what the Ryan report said about Glin Industrial School. Glin had a severe systemic regime of corporal punishment. The congregation transferred 2 Christian brothers to Glin despite evidence or suspicion of them sexually abusing boys in another institution under the Christian Brothers. Glin Industrial School failed in its fundamental requirements to provide care, education and training for the boys. And Tom, that was the institution you were detained in for 13 years.
Yes.
You were detained because your mother was described as destitute and unable to provide for you.
That's correct.
And you were born in the workhouse there?
In the workhouse in Newcastle West. And I spent my first 3 years of the life in the workhouse. My mother had to remain at the workhouse for my upkeep. And she had to do laundry work, scrubbing floors, domestic work. And at 3 years of age, I was taken from the workhouse with my mother to the courthouse in Newcastle West. And there a Judge Kenny made an order that I was to be removed and to be sent to Glin Industrial School in Limerick. How I got there at 3 years of age, I've never been able to fathom, because Glin Industrial School was regarded for senior boys, which was from 8 years up. And boys younger than that were usually sent to a convent in Passage West run by nuns, or else the Killarney run by nuns. And at a later age of 7, 8 or 9 years of age, they would be transferred then to Glin Industrial School. But Glin Industrial School was for senior boys. It was the second largest industrial school for senior boys in Ireland, run by the Christian Brothers. My earlier memories are of the workhouse. My mother constantly crying at the workhouse, women crying. There was terrible strict regulations as regards the workhouse in Newcastle West. It was also run by a congregation of nuns. They weren't allowed to visit the children only at every certain times. And it was quite a hopeless place to be. You were usually with a group of children in the workhouse. I remember being taken to the courthouse in Newcastle West, and a judge made an order that I was to be detained. A Christian brother from Glin Industrial School was at the workhouse, a brother Cullen, and he collected me to be taken to Newcastle West. I tried everything to hold on to my mother, but it was virtually
You were
impossible.
dragged by the sleeve, Tom. You wrote in your book, you're dragged by the sleeve.
Exactly.
Screaming
Caught,
and roaring,
yes,
trying to get
caught
away, yes.
and pulled out and shoved into the back seat of a two-door car that I had no hope of getting out of, because I couldn't get out with no door at either side. And I was driven off and down to Glin Industrial School. My very early memories, I remember well going in the gates of Glin Industrial School. High trees lined the avenue. It was like dark. It was like a tunnel going through. And then you come into a vast clearance. There was a high wall, 12 foot high, and then these gigantic buildings. We passed two Christian brothers were walking up the drive toward the school, all dressed in black, with wearing clerical collars. And two more brothers were walking along the front of the school, just looked at the car as we passed in. I remember coming into the clearance, and then this vast high wall and all these buildings, water towers. You can imagine it was a former workhouse for 800 people during the famine. And the Christian Brothers by this stage had got absolute control over the entire institution. I was driven to the front door, the hall door of where the Christian Brothers lived. And I was pulled out of the car, the back seat, and pulled in the door, and the Christian brother, Brother Colin, had papers. I had to be taken to the school office. I was pulled through, and as we came to the back of the building, large glass corridor was along with other Christian brothers that were off duty, all talking and smoking cigarettes around. I was pulled into the community room and into the brother's office. The Christian brother in the office absolutely terrified me.
You were only 3 years of age, Tom.
3 years of age, yes. But this man was frightening. He was like something from a horror movie. He was totally white coloured and white hair. His teeth were black, and he was a chain smoker behind the desk. I pulled back from the desk. I was terrified of him. And he stood up from the desk and he looked over at me and he took the papers that came for my admittance. He then ordered that I was to be taken to the infirmary building of the building, that I was too small to be left out in the yard with the other boys. So I was to remove to the building. At that, I peed in my pants and drowned the floor. And Brother Colin pushed me aside, and look what you're after doing. So he caught me by the arm and pulled me out. I tried with my best to hold on to the jamb of the door, but it was pointless. I was just dragged out and dragged down, roaring and screaming, into the infirmary building. When I got into the infirmary building, I was put into a dormitory type room and the doors were locked. Boys that were sick were in bed in that dormitory, and I'll never forget it. A few days after I arrived there, I could never get out of the room. My meals were brought by other boys to the rooms. There was never sufficient food. We were starving with the hunger in there. And a couple of days later, I had long curly hair. A Christian
Lovely
brother,
long blonde curl.
that's right. The Christian brother came with his scissors and he cut it off and removed my hair and took my clothes off me and gave me all dirty clothes to do with the... The one thing I had noticed on the drive into the industrial school was at the side of the driveway as we came into the clearance, two Christian brothers had a group of boys in the gardens there. There was something very unusual about this place. The boys here were dressed totally different. Their hair was different. There was something very strange about the whole thing. All hobnail boots with nails sticking out of them. All their hair cut up the side, and their clothes were filthy. They were in rags, and they were working in the garden. Two Christian brothers were giving them directions of what to do in the garden. It was a frightening experience. When I was in the infirmary, the food was totally inadequate. And there was a boy in the infirmary. His name was John Barkery. He was in the corner bed up at the right-hand side, and I was wandering around. There was no such thing as toys or anything to play with in the infirmary. It was a very brutal place. There was no curtains on the windows, no soft furnishing. It was just bare boards and beds. And we were starving in the infirmary. The doctor came and examined us and lifted up my nightshirt and saw all the ribs and ordered that I was to be put on what we called egg flip. It was a mug of milk with a raw egg in it, and I was to have that every day. The other boy, John Berkeley, in the corner, began eating the lime plaster off the wall and got very sick. He was older than me, John, and he was taken. I was the youngest there at that stage. He was taken. I had to go with him in Brother Cullen's car to the hospital in Limerick. I had to carry a sweet gallon because he was vomiting all the way in. He was taken to the hospital in Limerick and he died in the hospital in Limerick. He was never brought back by the Christian Brothers. And for years I wondered where in God's name was John Berkeley buried. And just a few years ago I found him.
Where?
He was found in Mount St. Lawrence's Cemetery. When he died at the hospital, the Christian Brothers refused to take back the body. And as the body was abandoned in hospital, they had no choice. The hospital had a portion of ground up beside the back wall of Mount St. Lawrence's Hospital. And they buried all destitute people there, just beside the dump.
A common grave, yes.
Yes. Now, when I went to visit it, it's just beside the dump by the wall. But this is the extraordinary thing I found. In the very same cemetery, as you go up the centre path on the right-hand side, is the most magnificent monument. And on this monument is written, in memory of the deceased members of the religious congregation of Christian Brothers interned here. And as I looked at the tomb, all I could say is there's no God. There couldn't be God. They allowed that to happen. He was totally abandoned. How would you abandon a child at that stage? Life in the infirmary was terrible, miserable. They had a nurse looking after the infirmary. She had little or no time for the children. She was having an affair with a local person in Glin. And when taking for walks in the evening, she took us out to Ballyhahill Road. And she used to terrify me. If I said anything or done anything, she'd lift me in over the bridge and threaten to drop me into the water. It was a terrifying experience. She was very brutal with the boys as well in the infirmary. She had no love whatsoever for children. We weren't allowed out of the infirmary block. I was kept there all the time. The superior over Glin that time was a brother Brian, but he very seldom came to the infirmary. Only on a couple of occasions did I ever see him, a white-haired man walking through. And then at 7 to 8 years of age, I was transferred from the infirmary off out to the lower dormitory, St. Columba's dormitory. The buildings at the back of the 2 stories in front were 3 stories high, and each building had dormitories. The bottom dormitory was St. Columba's, the middle dormitory was St. Malachy's, and the top dormitory was St. Fergus's. On the other side of the building, another corresponding 3-story building, you had the band room at the bottom, St. Fergus's dormitory on top of that, and on top of that you had St. Kevin's dormitory. All the dormitories accommodated 40 to 50 boys, sleeping in beds along the side of the wall. No such thing as heating, no such thing as that. Now, when I was transferred, there was a very old Christian brother, a brother Fitzmaurice. He had retired from India, and he was in charge of the smaller boys in the dormitory, St. Columba's, which was on the ground floor. Brother Fitzmaurice went off for duty every night. After 8 o'clock, he had left and went down to the monastery. The Christian brother in charge of the dormitory, St. Malachy's, would come down and start wandering around the beds. You have to, what I'm telling you is the lights were all turned off, and what you had was a very dull light. So it was just semi-dark in the dormitories at that stage. So the night watchman didn't come on duty till 10 o'clock. This Christian brother from upstairs was coming around, sitting on beds, interfering sexually with the boys in the bed. He sat on my bed one night and put his hand into the bed and pulled up my nightshirt and then started feeling my private. And he was just impossible to avoid. He knew exactly the time he'd have to be back in the monastery, so it was premeditated. It was going on night after night after night, and there was no way of avoiding him. I also heard rumours at that stage that to be ready for him, that he would do a lot worse. And one night I got up out of the bed to go to the toilet, and I was running through the lower corridor to get to the toilet. He grabbed me by the privates, and I made a bolt for the toilet. When I went to the toilet, he was waiting outside. He pushed me down to the partition there beside the bedroom and sexually abused me. I was screaming at him to leave me go and to leave me alone. It was pointless. He raped me there at that stage. And then when he was finished with me, he threw my nightshirt at me and told me to get back to bed.
And what age were you? You were 8 years of age?
I was 8 years of age at that stage. But he was sexually interfering with the younger children and constantly.
And that was known about?
It was known all over. The Christian Brothers were transferred to Glin, that already had a sexual record against for sexually abusing boys in other institutions.
Tom, let me talk to you about every Christian brother carried a leather and a whistle with him.
Yes.
The whistle was to line you all up, and the leather sometimes had nails in it.
Yes.
Okay. And you had nicknames from Mahoggy and Wiggy and Banger and Madman and Puffy Nose and Big Dick and Moby Dick.
Yes. Every Christian brother had
a nickname, yeah.
Yes.
And tell me about the punishments that you saw. What was the first punishment you saw? A young lad was being beaten for stealing apples. Tell me the first time you saw that horrific punishment. Tell us about that.
The first one really hit me when I came from infant class into first and second class. A young Christian brother was sent from Dublin to teach first and second class. This man had a most violent temper and was a terrible abuser. I was in the classroom one day and I took a pencil. He went out talking with another Christian brother on the corridor. And when he had left the room, I went up to his desk and I found a pencil. There was a hole in the floor and I wanted to put down the pencil to see how deep it was. Unfortunately, the pencil slipped out of my hand. I went down the floor. When he came back in, one of the boys told him what had happened. He told me to get out in the line. He went up, he took off his watch, he got the leather and put out one hand, then the second hand. And then he started punching me. I fell on the ground, and then I was kicked on the ground. And then he cut his collar with temper, and he tore the collar, the stud at the back broke, and he tore the collar off his neck in a raging temper. Without exaggeration, he could have killed me. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't the first time. On another occasion, there was a young boy there called Joe Miller in our class, and he put a wire into the electrical box and sparks came out. And of course, we were delighted with all the sparks. But when this brother returned to the classroom, some of the boys told him what happened, that they get sparks out of this box. And he said, "Who told you that?" So poor Joe was pulled out. He was beat, punched, kicked around the floor, and that like a sack of potatoes.
Was that Monkey Murray? Is that Monkey Murray we're talking about? Monkey Murray?
Monkey Murray was in another class above. This was only first and second.
First and second year, right? We'll come to Monkey Murray in a minute, yeah. Mm-hmm.
When we got to third and fourth class, the Christian brother there was the Christian brother that was in the dormitory sexually abusing us.
Okay.
So I tried to avoid him. I sat on, when the minute I got into the classroom, I sat straight up in the top, first desk in the classroom.
Yeah, yeah.
But he came in and cool as a breeze, he started ordering everyone around where they would sit. And he ordered me to sit at the back of the classroom. And there was an empty desk behind me and no boys at either side. And then what he would do is he'd write on the blackboard, very calmly on the blackboard, and tell all the boys to copy this on their books. And at that time you had pens dipped in ink.
Yes.
And they had to write. He told them then, no talking, everything was to be totally quiet, and nobody was to look around.
Nobody was to look behind.
Nobody was to look behind. He'd come back then and sit in the desk, the empty desk behind, and bang me on the shoulder to turn. And at that stage, he'd be masturbating himself at the back of the classroom. He had a full view of anyone coming because the door was up in the front of the classroom. There was no exit from the back where somebody could come in. But he was a serious sexual abuser during his time.
And you were
in
trapped,
Glin.
you were a victim. There was nothing you could do there. You were trapped there. There was nothing you could do.
Totally trapped. I had terrible experiences. I didn't know how to cope with the sex abuse, to be honest.
Well, can I just interrupt you there? You talk about how you did cope with that. Can I quote from your book? You learned to completely disappear somewhere inside my mind.
That's right.
It was the only way I could cope with it.
Yeah.
And stop myself from going mad. That's how you cope, Tom. That's in your book, how you described that.
That's right. But that was the only hope, because he could appear at any time and rape you, and there was no one you could turn to. There was no one you could tell. There was no one anything.
There was no complaint procedure. You couldn't complain to anybody. And that's why they got away with it.
When I raised a complaint with the superior, I was told, if he hears any more complaints, you'll be sent to Letterfrack or Dankin. You'd never stop complaining.
They were frightening places.
Yes, Letterfrack was run by the same congregation.
Yes, the Christian
it was isolated out in Galway. So that's how they operated. After 4th and 5th class, I got into 5th and 6th, 3rd and 4th class, I got into 5th and 6th class. And the Christian brother there, we had him nicknamed Monkey Murray.
He was the worst, was he? Yeah.
He was a vicious, violent person. And he
had it in for you, Tom, for some reason, hadn't he? Yeah.
Some boys in the class he seemed to get on well with. He didn't seem to bother them, even if they made mistakes.
Were they wealthy boys, or had they parents?
There'd be boys that come in that related, they'd be more streetwise.
Right, okay.
They come in from families, and some of them would be going home in the summer, and he didn't bother touching them. But he gave me a hell of a time.
Nobody to defend you. Nobody
to defend me. What he done was he'd write stuff on the blackboard and then tell you to copy it in your book. He'd come down and put the hand on the desk beside you looking at your writing. His breath was foul. He was a very bad breath. He was a very heavy smoker, but his breath was stinking. He then would leather you for the least thing, a blot of ink on the book or something else. And when you got the leather on the 3 hands, under both hands, your hands were so sore, you were holding them like that.
And sometimes there were nails in those leathers, weren't there?
Some of the Christian brothers sent their letters up to the bootmaker's workshop to have pennies, old pennies.
Coins and nails.
Spare keys were leathered into nails, and also pieces of lead, were to give the leather extra weight when they were beating the boys. And there was no law and order as far as Christian brothers were concerned.
Did you ever think of running away?
I did.
That wasn't an option, really. It wasn't, Tom.
It wasn't an option, because boys that ran away were immediately, the procedure was very cleverly done. And how they managed to find out who ran away it was, they had a system when a Christian brother blew a whistle, everybody had to line in line, 12 in a row, and there was they'd be older boys, a monitor and a sub-monitor, had to check the row and name the boy that was missing. They had to report that to the Christian brother in charge. He notified the Gardaí, and within a day or two they were brought back.
The Gardaí were involved in this as well.
Everybody was in collusion. The whole state was in collusion.
What happened to that boy when he was brought back?
When the boy was back, several Christian brothers, anyone on duty that would see him, his hair was totally removed, bald, first of all. He had to do without any food for the following day. He'd get nothing even though he was starving. And if he ran away the second time, he had to hold his hands outright until he collapsed in the yard. If he ran away the third time, he was transferred to Letterfrack or to Dangan Reformatory. He was transferred there. There was no way. The boys that wet the beds, I don't know how they survived. Every morning they were beating them.
Public beatings in front of everybody.
Exactly.
The humiliation, the degradation of them. Stripped and put over a chair.
Exactly.
Humiliated and degraded.
Exactly. And made to get into cold baths, freezing water to wash. And they had to be called every hour. And how they knew that, the night watchman, their 2 socks had to be tied to the end of their beds. So every hour the night watchman went around, he called them to use the toilet. Those of us later, when I worked on the farm, we tied 1 sock to the end of our bed. So the night watchman knew which boys to call to milk the cows at 6 o'clock. So you'd know the 2 socks or the 1 sock. And the night watchman patrolled the grounds every hour. But the night watchman himself was a serious sexual abuser. He was an ex-army man that had retired from the army, and he got himself.
Christian brothers you had to fear, the night watchman as
The
well,
night watchman.
and the older boys.
The older boy, there was no escape. If they had their eye on you, it was dead. Everyone knew what was going on. To say that no one knew is a fallacy. They were in the one institution. The one thing I'd like to say, there were some Christian brothers never beat boys or never sexually interfered, but they stood idly by. They knew what was going on. They did nothing about it. It wasn't a thing that was a secret. The superior made sure there was no complaints made to anywhere, and that's how it operated. When I was in sixth class with this monkey Murray, we had catechism every day from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. But he got up one day at 3 o'clock and he started giving us a lecture about catechism. We had to learn the phrases off by heart. And in it he said there that we were the only ones that had the one true Holy Roman Catholic Apostolic Church. That all the rest, there were fakes, there were Mormons. He went on about Mormons and all the different religions. And when he had finished, he said, does any boy like to ask a question here?
Don't tell me you asked a question, did you?
I put up the hand. I put up the hand. And he said to me, what do you? I said, how are you so sure we got the right one? There was no answer. He just dropped everything, grabbed the leather, came straight down. Get out in the line, you pup, you. Without that hand, then the leather fell out of his hand. He started punching me. The next thing was I made him to go for a bolt to get out the door. He caught me by the back of the neck and he banged my head off there and split my skull.
I see the scars still there, yeah. That's where you got that from,
split me face open. The place was spouting blood. He took out a dirty handkerchief then out of his soutane and told me to hold that to my head, that I'd have to go to the infirmary. So I had to hold the hand, and I went down the stairs with him. And as we were crossing the yard to get to the infirmary building, the superior, a Christian brother who was running the institution, was going towards the toilets with the plumber. And he saw all the blood and he came over and he asked me what happened there. So I told him what happened. This brother banged my head off of that. And he said, what did you do to upset him? I said, I'd done nothing. And he said, you obviously did do something to upset him to such a state. And at that then we proceeded to the infirmary. When we got to the infirmary, the Christian brothers had got rid of the nurse that used to work there. And they put a Christian brother in charge of the infirmary, a Brother Crow. And Brother Crow looked at the wound in my head and he said he'd have to call a doctor. But at that stage, I was gone dizzy. I wouldn't be able to keep standing. So I said to him, look, brother, I'm getting dizzy. I won't be able to stay standing. So the two of them caught me and lifted me up on a bed in the infirmary. The doctor came and asked me how I was. And I told him I'm very dizzy. So he said to keep me in bed and gave me 6 stitches there in the forehead. And I was kept in bed for a few days. And the doctor came then and removed the stitches. Now that Christian brother kept on teaching in Glin Industrial School. He was beating, leathering, totally out of control, and there was nothing ever done about it. Nothing.
Tom, tell me about your daily routine. You're awakened at 7 a.m., then the rush to the washroom to get washed. Take it on from there. Where did your daily routine go?
Well, when I was, you see, my early days were spent in the knitting room. We're making socks and that with Mrs. Cunningham. And she was a very nice lady. She was from the village and she came up working. And she never reported any boys to Christian brothers because she knew they'd leather them or beat them. Now, when I'd finished with Mrs. Cunningham, the old brother that was over all the trades was a Brother Cullen. He was a very vicious man. He was the man that collected me. And he ordered that I was to go on the farm on a Monday morning.
A working farm you had,
You had to go, you were working on the farm. So anyway, I went to work on the farm. Now, when I went to work on the farm, I had to tie a sock to the end of my bed. That meant that the night watchman had to call me at 6 o'clock in the morning, summer and winter. I had to get out of bed in the dull lights, dress. No such thing as anything to eat. Go straight to the fields, bring in the cows and start milking cows, feeding pigs, poultry. I was, at that stage, I was just finished school. I was about 14.
14, okay.
And I was put on the farm. And the farm workers. It was hard work. You were out in all types of weather. There was no winter clothing provided. The place was freezing. I remember one day on the farm, we were so hungry, I had to kick a frozen turnip out of the ground. And when I ate it, I finished up in the infirmary with cramps in my stomach. And that's how the system ran. Also, we were so hungry that we used to have to raid the bins at the back of the Christian Brothers kitchens. Any scraps of food that would be thrown out after the dinner at 2 o'clock, we'd be scratching for bits of potatoes.
With the rats would be there too, scavenging.
Well, you had to beat the rats, but often you landed and the rats were crawling all over the food and you couldn't eat it because it was an old workhouse and all these drains around the rats only ran down. The place was infested with rats. When I was even feeding the pigs, before you'd enter the building in the wintertime when it was dark, you'd beat the drum outside to frighten the rats so they wouldn't run across your legs when you were going up the passageways. And when you put on the lights, the rats were all running along the walls, going down along and out the drains. Then they were chipping the potato pits we had for the boys were all being chipped with rats eating them. They were everywhere in the place, and it was virtually impossible to get them under control. The main problem we had about our own personal hygiene was when we went to bed at night, we were ate alive with fleas and head lice. Our heads were crawling with lice. When you were in the chapel in the morning, you could see all the lice crawling around the boys in front of you around their necks. And when the lice got very bad, you were sent to the infirmary and your head was shaved off. And they put this ointment on and sent you back. But when you were back and the hair started growing, you were then back again. The fleas just continued. Every morning you got up, all the front of your chest here was all marks from where the fleas bit you during the night. It was infested with fleas, and there was no such thing as care. An inspector was sent by the department.
Dr. McCabe.
Yes.
Dr. McCabe, yeah.
Dr.
He was the medical inspector for the department, yes.
Yes, but the whole thing was a complete sham.
Was it?
Every boy had to dress up. The beds were all made up. The place was cleaned out. Any boy with marks from beatings had to be kept in the infirmary and hadn't to be on the parade ground when she was coming. She was brought into the parlour and she was fed in the parlour with the superior, and then they done a tour of the thing. She came onto the yard. We were all lined up in our sections in the yard. And she walked up and down. She was emotional. She never asked us a question, how were we or how we weren't. She walked up and down with a big fur coat on her. And she talked to all the Christian brothers that were present and smiling at them. And then she left. Her report was a complete and utter sham. It was crazy what they were doing. She was the inspector for the Department of Education. The Department of Education were the people that were paying the Christian Brothers per head to feed us, clothe us, and educate us. The Department of Education totally failed to look after things. Complaints were being written about Glin. They were coming in the night. One of the previous night watchmen had sent reports to the Department of Education outlining the problems in Glin, that Christian Brothers were beating the children with leathers, that the food was totally inadequate, their clothing is totally inadequate, but nothing was done. Again, what they'd done was Dr. McCabe arrived and spoke to the superior, never interviewed the night watchman, never interviewed anyone that made a complaint. Whatever the superior said, she just reported there's no grounds for complaint here and drove off again.
What was your food like, by the way, Tom? What breakfast, dinner, tea? What did you get for those meals?
The routine was you had mass every morning.
Yes.
And you had this rosary at night, this religious thing.
Religious thing, yeah. Religion.
It was a shambles.
Yeah.
We had mass every morning at 7 o'clock. I had to do mass serving. The other boy, there was a mass server, had to go out and ring the bell. There was a big bell in the chapel outside. And the local priest would come up from the village, either Canon Ryan or Father Murphy. One of the local priests would come in to say the mass. My job was to light the candles. In Glin, The sacristy was at the back of the chapel, so it meant in order to light the candles when the bell rang, I had to have my mass service rig out on. I had to walk up the centre of the chapel. Christian brothers all at the back of the chapel, all the boys at both sides up the front of the chapel. They had altar rails in front. You went through the gate and the altar rails and you went up and you lit the candles. You then, under no circumstances, ever turn your back on the tabernacle. If
Okay.
you turned your back on the tabernacle,
Oh.
it was a very serious crime. You would never forget it as long as you live. You had to come down the side steps and go back. Then when you went in, the canon dressed out, or the priest, you had to carry a mass book in front of you and walk up the centre aisle of the chapel. And then you had to bow at the bottom of the steps, carry the mass book up and put it up on the brass anvil, come down the side, and then the mass said. At that time, all the masses were said in Latin.
In Latin, yes.
So everything in Latin, we said all the masses. Christian brothers, when it came to communion time, you went back and turned the cloths over the altar rails. You carried a brass plate. The superior came up first. All the principal teachers and the other brothers that were working would all be in line, all kneel along the rail, and you had to carry the plate as the priest gave them communion. Then after that, all the boys had to go up line by line to get communion at that, and that's how it operated.
And your breakfast was simply 2 thin slices of bread?
At 8 o'clock, you went out for breakfast, and everybody had to line up in their sections outside, in straight lines outside the dining room. The brother Colin was in charge of the dining room. You hear the great bowls being poured, and all in. You had to stand up beside your section at a bench. It was just a plank bolted onto a thing and a table, only 12 at every table. One of them was a monitor, one was a sub-monitor. They were the monitors that checked the line. The monitors were always rewarded by the Christian brothers.
When they
because
reported somebody, yeah.
They made life very easy for them. You sat at a plate. What you got was 2 thin cuts of bread, and in the centre, between every 4 boys, was 2 very small pieces of margarine. So what we used to do was we used to spin the plate, and whichever bit of margarine faced you, you got it. If the other small bits on it, that was it. You got nothing again. You ate it as fast as you could, and you got a tin mug of sugarless
tea.
And you drank that. The breakfast to be over in 10 minutes. After that, you stood up. It was grace before meals, grace after meals. It was all prayers. And then you went out in the yard and you had to report back to your dormitory to make your bed, polish your boots, and polish the corridors above. When you were polishing the corridors in the dormitory, the Christian brother in charge of the dormitory would walk behind you with a leather. If he thought you weren't polishing fast enough, he hit the leather. The washroom at the end, we used to go in every morning for wash. The water was freezing. We were standing on cold concrete, and the Christian brothers stood at the door, examined you coming out. If it was the slightest bit of dirt, beat you in both hands and told you to get back again. We used to be shivering with the cold and with the fear coming out that you were going to get a beating again from the Christian brothers coming out. They all loved using the leathers. There was no such thing as any discipline as to how to use the leathers. They could do what they like. And the punishments were very severe. It wasn't that people were punished on one day. Children were being punished every day, constant roaring and screaming, getting beaten with leathers. And that's how they ran and managed the industrial school. The one very bad beating I very well remember, I was about 8 years of age, and I was just out in the yard when the whistles were blown, and we had to fall into our section. And the superior at the time, a brother McAleer, appeared onto the yard with 2 Christian brothers holding a boy. The boy had been found stealing apples from a local orchard, and he was caught. He had a very serious crime. Brother McAleer decided he would have to be properly chastised. He ordered us all into the big play hall. They brought in a chair, they stripped him naked inside, and if they laid into him with the leather, the screaming that went on in that hall with the echoes, you can still hear them. He was crying and shouting for all his might.
What age was he?
He was about 9 years of age. And just because he stole a couple of apples. The two Christian brothers stood beside MacAleer, and they let him beat him. He could have killed him. They wouldn't lift a finger to stop him. Nobody would lift a finger and say, that's enough. Will you let the young lad go? Nobody. He was just totally brutalized. To say that it wasn't known what was happening in Glin is a lie. The Department of Education were getting word even. They had a case of where a boy was flogged naked with a cat and nine tails to his black blade. And a local county councillor, Martin McGairn in Limerick, done everything in his power to have the authorities to look into Glin.
Yeah.
They totally failed. The boy was very badly beaten. And that evening we were all taken down to Glin Pier, and he was made to swim in the salt water. The pain was unbearable, and that night he ran away again. Glin is 32 miles from Limerick. He walked all the way home, watching out because Christian brothers, Gardaí, everyone would be looking
for him. Yeah.
They were very easily recognizable because of their hair, their clothes, and their boots. They would be known miles away. He eventually got home. His mother was shocked when she found it. His shirt was on his back, stuck with the blood. She took him the following day to their local representative, Martin McGairn, and she got the boy to show Martin McGairn. Martin McGairn got a doctor to examine the boy and to confirm that the boy was very badly beaten with a cat and nine tails, and to show Martin McGairn his back. The doctor reported, Martin McGairn got the report. He sent it to the Minister for Education, the top man in the country, over the system. And the Minister for Education took months to reply. Martin McGairn done everything in his power to highlight the case. The most extraordinary thing is this. All punishments were supposed to be recorded with the Department of Education.
There was no punishment book in Glin.
Yeah, there was no punishment book ever kept. Dr. McCabe never looked at the Christian Brothers for a punishment book into how boys were beaten and for what offence. It never occurred. The documents and the connections with Martin McGairn and the Department of Education, several letters were written. The Department of Education stated they have no record of the case. But as luck would have it, Martin McGairn sent a copy of the file to a man working in Dublin, and they was sent to Father Flanagan in the United States.
That's Father Flanagan, the boys' town fame.
That's right. He was a man far ahead of his time in childcare.
And in his report, actually, he reported by the 15-year-old boy from Glin who fled to the doctor after severe flogging. He actually mentioned that.
That's right.
In his report.
That's right.
It was mentioned.
That's right. Yeah. And when it turned out, as it transpired, Father Flanagan had a copy of the file of Gerard Fogarty in Glin that was flogged by Christian brothers by the cat and nine tails. The Christian brother that carried out the flogging was actually the superior in Glin, the head Christian brother over the group in Glin. And he was transferred then onto Salt Hill in Galway as another superior. He wasn't demoted, he was just transferred till everything cooled down, and so as nothing would happen. The files survived in Father Flanagan's archives, and they're the only records of what happened. The problem, there was total collusion between Department of Education and Christian Brothers.
Lies and cover-ups.
Yeah, it was. Any complaints that were in were going missing, mislaid files, all this type of thing, and trying to create good reports. The strange part about Glin was, when the complaints were being made, it came from the most likely place you'd expect to find it. It came from a visiting Christian brother.
Yeah, because their visiting teams were more authentic and more honest than sometimes the departments were.
Yeah, far more. Yeah. He arrived.
There were good Christian brothers. There were some of them were.
That's right. He arrived and he was sent by the provincial to report back about what was going on in Glin. And he reported back about the conditions in Glin Industrial School. He complained about the lavatories, which was the lavatories were stinking. There was no toilet paper in them. There was no water to flush the lavatories in Glin. We had to carry buckets of water 3 times a day to flush them, but then the water ran out. There was no water to flush them. He reported back to the provincial he had visited the lavatories in Glin at 11 o'clock in the morning. They were stinking. and they hadn't been flushed that morning. He reported that out of the 5 teachers in Glin Christian Brothers teaching, only one of them, he said, is satisfactory. He reported back far more detail than Dr. McCabe was reporting back to the thing. But the provincial, for some unknown reason, done nothing about it. If you look at how it was structured, it's only after we found out what was going on. The Department of Education were paying the Christian Brothers,
Competition fee.
and they were also
Competition
paying
fee.
their salaries for teaching. The Christian Brothers were deducting money from the children's account into their account as salaries. They were taking it. They were also placing money in a building fund, which was supposed to be surplus money from the industrial school. How in God's name could you have surplus money when the children were losing weight from starvation? They were siphoning the money off, and that's why the conditions were so bad.
And Tom, that capitation fee paid by the state ended at 16 years of age.
That's right.
And that's on your 16th birthday, you were turfed out.
Yes.
And you were given a parcel.
A parcel.
And you'd 1 suit of clothes, 1 shirt,
yes.
1 pair of stockings,
yes.
1 pair of shoes, and a rosary.
A rosary bead, and worn to say the rosary every day.
You were told never to miss mass.
Yes, never.
Say the rosary every day, not to visit public houses,
no.
and to avoid smoking tobacco.
Exactly.
Those were your instructions going out into the wide world.
Very much so. That was seen as a complete failure.
But you were totally unprepared for the wide world, Tom, weren't you?
When I left the school, I didn't know how to post a letter.
You didn't know what money, you didn't know what anything was.
I didn't know how to use a telephone. I hadn't a clue. I didn't know how to address people. Everybody you addressed was sir, yes sir, no sir. That's all you were ever trained to do. When you went out, when you were eating something, you wanted a spoon to eat it with. You were totally ill-equipped and totally ill-prepared for the outside world. You knew nothing about outside. Other boys were more fortunate that they actually got home for a month in the summer, but the superior wanted to stop that. He said there it wasn't right to be sending them home. Their mothers weren't what they should be because they were born outside wedlock.
They were
regarded as being stigmatized because of that. When they were sent out to the most meaningless jobs.
Domestic emptying garbage.
That's right.
Washing the floors.
They're washing floors. They had no hope of a further education. They were totally dependent on the system.
Slave labour.
Exactly. It was slave labour. If they missed a job or couldn't, they had nowhere to go. They were to go on the road. But I will show you a document later that will tell you exactly what was happening to some of the children.
And you referred to as the boy from the industrial school. That's where your book came from.
Yeah.
The boy from Glin Industrial School.
Everywhere you went. Oh, who's he? Oh, he's the boy from the industrial school. He's the industrial school boy. So it was a stigma that was stuck to you. You know, a lot of children went in. It was an idea at the time that some children had committed a crime. Some had. Pittance. It was usually they might have stolen something because they were hungry. Or because their parents couldn't manage. Others were sent in from Mitching school that they never went to school. So they were sent on to Glin, to attend school in Glin, and that's how they operated.
It affects you today still. You still have flashbacks and sweats at night, don't you, Tom?
It comes back all the time. From the rape and that, there are nights you wake up and you're covered in sweat. It's there in the subconscious, out of the blue, and you can wake up shouting because you think they're coming there.
You see these abusers coming towards you again.
It affects you for life. Something that happens to a child remains with them for the rest of their life. It's not something you can just shake off and walk away from. It's there in your mind.
Tommy, you've described yourself as one of the lucky ones.
One of the very
lucky because you're still alive, unlike the child that you found under the floorboards. Tell us about that.
That's right. When the industrial school, when I was due to leave the industrial school in 1965 at 16 years of age, an announcement had been made that the Glin Industrial School was to close. The superior over at Glin Industrial School asked if I'd stay on working at the industrial school until a decision could be made about the buildings. None of the other boys would stay on because they had been home on summer holidays and they knew what home life was like. In my situation, I'd gone from the mother and baby's home to Glin. The only life I ever knew was in an institution. And to go out would be a desperate change for me. It'd be like walking out into the deep. So I stayed on working for the Christian Brothers.
Even though you had suffered all that abuse, you still stayed working. Most people would have run as far and as fast as they could. You stayed to work for them.
That's right. I was the only past pupil that ever stayed on working in Glin. And I was the only past pupil that continues to remain in Glin at the present. And I was the only past pupil afterwards that the Christian Brothers took to court and sued to get documents.
Tell me about those documents. Yes, you found something. They were clearing out the documents, burning them, and you found something. Tell us what you found, Tom.
Yes. When the industrial school closed in Glin,
1966.
1966, the last of the boys, including my brother William, were sent to Tralee. Tralee was no improvement.
Well, that was St. Patrick's Industrial School in Tralee. St. Joseph's.
St. Joseph's
in Tralee. That was horrendous too. They were all horrendous.
That's right, but there was no improvement in that care. So some of the boys tried to set fire to the buildings, but that was all taken care of. A Christian brother was sent down from Dublin to find out what was going on, that there was a Christian brother in the school sexually abusing the boys there again. And that's why the Christian brother was sent to report back to headquarters of what was happening in Glin. The Christian Brothers then decided that the Glin Industrial School would now be converted into a novitiate
for the Christian Brothers,
for the Christian Brothers congregation. Everything suddenly changed. Buckets of money to spend. All central heating was put in throughout the whole building. The dormitories were divided up into individual rooms. Each Christian brother would have his own private room and a bed and all the sink units, the troughs we were washing in had to be sledged and thrown out. All new washing basins had to be put in. All new showers had to be put in. The whole dining room had to be totally laid out again with the floors covered with this terrazzo and no end of money to be spent for the students. It was to open in September, but by August, the Christian Brothers in Glin had got word that the school would not be opening for the young Christian Brothers students. The following year, the Christian Brothers that were recently professed in their houses of formation in Dublin came to Glin on their holidays. A novice master was over them. That was a Christian brother who was over the younger Christian Brothers. The Christian Brothers, when they arrived, had collars, soutanes, and the whole lot. Strict guidelines were laid down as to how it would happen. When leaving the school grounds, they were not to leave on their own. They were to leave in pairs. They were not to loiter in the village or speak to seculars. When they were walking, they were to have custodial of the eyes. They were to look straight. They weren't to look at contours of the body. And if anybody spoke to them, they were to keep moving. Women were to be avoided. They were a threat to man. They could commit acts of depravity of a most beastly nature. They had to be totally avoided. And the Christian Brothers were brought. But one day when I was working on the farm, we had a farm attached to Glin, we were making hay in Conway's field. Every field had a name. And the young Christian Brothers, as we were making the hay, the industrial school was finished at that stage. We saw two Christian brothers coming down the hill with a chest. And I was wondering, what in the name of God are they bringing in a chest? They brought us all lemonade, barnbrack with butter in it. I was stunned. I couldn't believe we were getting lemonade and barnbrack.
And why do you think that was, Tom? What was the reason behind that?
Because the younger Christian brothers, they were bringing it down for that. And one of the Christian brothers said to me, I'm amazed. I said, how in God's name are they giving us lemonade and barnbrack? So he asked me about the industrial school.
And they couldn't believe it, yeah.
I told him the beatings. I said we weren't allowed into the river to drink water. We had to row the hay with our hands. And the thistles in our hands, we had to pick out all the thistles. When I was at supper that night in the staff's dining room, a knock came to the door. A Christian brother came in and said, you're to report to the superior's office immediately. I was wondering, what in the name of God would the superior want me so urgent for? Because normally if there was a complaint or something, he had to tell me I could meet me on the premises at any time. When I went to the cloister and went down, some of the young Christian brothers were talking along the cloister. So he opened the door of his office and called me in and closed the door. He was furious.
You had spilled the beans. You had said what you shouldn't.
He said to me, you're talking, he says, about what went on in the industrial school here. There's something I want to say to you. The industrial school here is closed. We're now running this as a college. We don't want to hear one word ever again about an industrial school. It's gone, it's finished. From now on, he says things, if we get one word of you again mentioning about an industrial school, you'll be out that gate. You better get their head on your shoulders. You're not to mention the industrial school here. We don't want it spoken about or talked about. And that was it. And he was very vexed and very adamant. I had upset the apple tart. I told the younger students what was going on. And that was the problem.
You spilled the beans.
I suppose the
You
problem.
opened a can of worms.
The problem, they didn't want the younger members
Knowing.
listening and hearing what was actually happening within the institution.
Can I ask about your mother? Did you ever find your mother again after
I
that?
did. After I left, I tell you, we finish on from when I went working at the industrial school. I went to the Christian Brothers to try and find out about my mother and that. There was no possibility of finding out. They said, blank sheet, no connection whatever with your mother or anything. I said, there must be something on records, nothing. They said, there's nothing, just blank out. So I was inquiring around. And I found out that there was a family, the same name, Walls, living in Shanagolden, which is about 9 miles from
Shanagolden,
Glin.
yes. From Limerick.
I went there to a cottage that was above the Catholic Church in Shanagolden, and a family of Walls lived at the left-hand side in the cottage. And I called to them, and I told them that I was Thomas Wall, that I was in Glin Industrial School for years, and that I was looking for my mother. And they looked at me, so they questioned me. I said, well, I had no contact. I had no letters. They said, you surely got letters. I said, no, I had no letters. There's nothing to go on. The Christian Brothers have no contact with her. I had nothing. So they said, come back next Sunday and we'll let you know. The following Sunday, I went back and told them they had met my mother and that she was living in Newcastle West and that we could visit her. There was no problem. So the next Sunday, I went and we visited her at Newcastle West. Unfortunately, that said, she was dying of cancer. She had only a few weeks to live. And she was very ill at the time.
Did she recognise you?
No, I told her who I was. I hadn't seen me since I was 3 years of age. I told her who I was. And I told her, she asked me what was it like in Glin, and I told her the truth. It was a terrible place, and the whole lot. And I asked her, how'd you never call to see me? She said, I called on 3 occasions. You weren't allowed in. We weren't allowed to see the children. We weren't allowed. The letters she was sending, I wasn't getting them. Nothing was being passed on. There was a total, once you got into Glin, everything was cut off. And that's how it operated. She just lived a short while after that.
Oh.
And then she died. But I was very glad at the same time that I had met her. If I hadn't gone that time, I'd have missed her. And that was important that I actually met her. I felt at that stage it gave me some kind of closure. I wasn't continuously searching for someone and the lot. I was to find out after what was happening with the letters and the whole lot.
Your brothers William and Patrick, they were in Glin too at the same
That's
time.
right.
Tell me, but did you find them? Well, they were with you there,
Yeah.
weren't they?
When I was in Glin, I was about 12 years of age when my brother Patrick arrived. He was older than me. Patrick was put straight away to work in the boiler house, shoveling coal into a boiler. The boiler was used to generate steam to drive the laundry buildings, the big wheels in the laundry,
Okay.
to turn the washing machines. The boilers were not to heat the buildings. There was no heat whatever for the buildings from the boiler.
Yes.
It was a steam-driven laundry and that. Patrick told me my mother was alive. I didn't know whether to believe him or not, because this was a story that a lot of boys were passing on in the institution to other boys, that their mothers were still out there. And I didn't know whether it was just some story he was making up. I had no way of knowing. I also had difficulty with him in telling him about the sex abuse I was going under, because I was terrified that if he reported it, what would it be like for both of us in the institution? And I couldn't tell him about the sex abuse. If he confronted it, we'd be in a bigger mess again. And that was the problem. My brother William arrived from Killarney. He was sent to the convent in Killarney. He arrived later. He was in Glin. He was sexually abused in Glin as well, beat up and sexually abused. He was then sent from Glin to Tralee in 1966, in September 1966, when Glin closed down. He was sexually abused in Tralee again by a Christian brother before he was released on. He developed in later life a terrible chronic alcoholic. And at the moment, I have him in a house living quite near me. And that's how some of the past pupils cope. That's why I say I regard myself still as one of the lucky ones, that I was able to hold down a job after. I was able to keep going despite having these nightmares and all that, that I still managed to keep going. And that's why when the Ryan report was published, I joined a couple of the committees to help past pupils to have their cases heard and taken to the redress board to have assessed for compensation. When the redress board was established, it was never about money. It was about having the truth told and believed. Up to that, there was total denial of what was happening in Industrial School. A new problem had arisen as well, was that if you didn't take your case to courts within 10 years, you couldn't re-enter the case. The law had to be changed that the abusers, even though it was after 10 years, that they could be prosecuted. Before that, after 10 years, and there was no way you could get a solicitor or anyone to take your case. When I was in Newcastle West with my mother, I visited a solicitor in Newcastle West, and I told him of my experiences in Glin. And he told me out straight. He said, Tom, I want to tell you something. There isn't a solicitor or a judge in this country that would listen to your case. If you keep saying what you're saying, you'll be locked in an asylum and you won't be left out of it. There is no way, he says, you'll get anyone to take on your case. He said, it's out. And the best thing in this country, he says, you have to keep your mouth shut about what done. He said, that's the way things operate. And that's how it was. You have to realize that up to the 1970s, you never heard of a priest being taken into court. You never heard of a Christian brother being taken to court, no matter what they'd done. And even in the legal systems with the judges, anybody that committed a serious offence could go to the local parish priest, get a letter from the local parish priest, hand it to the judge, and the judge read what the parish priest had to say, and he made his decision then on what was to happen. So you can see the whole system was totally contaminated, that there was no hope of getting word out or having the truth told and believed. I was very glad with the Sean Ryan report. It hit the iceberg. It didn't hit everything. It couldn't hit everything. Because so much went on behind the high wall that he couldn't have got to it. But at least it stated, he proved beyond reasonable doubt we were totally abused in those institutions.
You experienced this yourself when you found, when the Christian Brothers Glin was closing, they were burning papers, and you came across, you were told to burn them. And you came across a letter addressed to you from your aunt.
That's right.
Which had never been given to you.
That's right.
And you ended up in court over that. Tell us that story, Tom.
When the Christian Brothers opened Glin as a novitiate for young boys to join in the Christian Brothers, the numbers in the congregation began to decline. After 3 or 4 years, it became clearer that Glin could no longer be used as a novitiate for the Christian Brothers. The Christian Brothers decided to sell the buildings at Glin. There were 4 Christian Brothers in Glin. With me at that time, they were retired members. So the Christian Brothers went to pull out of Glin completely. The superior of the Glin Industrial School got the transfer for the other Christian Brothers to be moved, and he called me to the office in Glin. The big ledgers that were on the office containing the names of the boys when they came to the school and all, we took them out and put them in the boot of his car. He then ordered that everything else in the office is to be burnt immediately, to be thrown out. I said, where can we burn them? Here, we're right in the building. He said, just throw them out in the lawn. I said, look, there could be something there on me. He said, if you anything you want, just take it. But everything else is to be burned.
Anything you want, just take it. You were told that.
Anything you want, by the superior.
Right, okay.
I got bundles of stuff, never checked it, put in a couple of boxes, left it there. drew out all the other stuff, set fire to it, and it was all burned outside in the grounds. Glin Industrial School closed, and I went working for Glin Castle, the Knight of Glin, and I was head gardener there for the next 45 years. The documents I got in the box, and I put them into an attic in a house in Glin. I then went working for the Knight of Glins, and I was head gardener there for the next 45 years. I lived in a lodge that was on the premises belonging to the Knight of Glin. It was castle property. After they were lying in the attic for approximately 40 years, and a storm broke out one night, and the lady that was in the house, a Polish woman with 2 children, Elvira and her 2 children, they contacted me to come down quick, that the water was starting to come through the house. And we went up and we found that the storm had shifted a lot of the slating off the roof. We went up in the attic and brought out the boxes. And here I was now with these boxes of documents from the Glin Industrial School. I didn't know what to do with them at first. I wanted to give them to some archivists or people that would know about documents and know how they'd be looked after. I had a meeting with the University of Limerick, and the University of Limerick agreed that they would take the documents, they would clean them, there was a lot of dust and dirt on them, and they would preserve the documents. And I was delighted with that because it was a big institution where they'd be safe from harm.
Mm-hmm.
The article appeared in the Irish Times newspaper on a number of events, and there was no move on anything. So I donated the collection of the box of documents to the University of Limerick, and I presented them. The evening I presented the documents, it wasn't printed on the Times the following day. It went out in what was known as the Times Online.
Mm-hmm.
Within a few days, an email arrived to the president of the University of Limerick stating that the European province of the Congregations of Christian Brothers are claiming ownership of the documents from the Glin Industrial School. So I was contacted, and I laughed. I thought it was a joke. I said, who in the name of God is looking for that? I thought, this is silly. There's no such thing. They said, no, there's a letter following from their solicitors. All documents in connection with the Glin Industrial School are to be held until the matter is settled. They threatened court action. I didn't budge on it. Then they came to view the documents. They came to view the documents. So we had a viewing at the University of Limerick. But when we started opening the boxes and going through it, there was a problem for the Christian Brothers in the boxes.
What was the problem, Tom?
The problem was that they had been trading the children. When the children were finished at the industrial school, they were sending them out to a slave trade. The documents were with the University of Limerick. The Christian Brothers challenged me to hand the documents over to them. I refused, as these were documents that I was given by the superior in the Glin Industrial School. They threatened legal action. Again, then they backed on that, and they wanted to see these documents themselves. They sent an archivist and their solicitors to Limerick University, and I arranged that we'd meet at University Limerick, but I brought a solicitor to ensure that no documents would disappear out of the boxes. We went through the documents, and when we went through, a problem arose. The boxes contained indentures about children at the industrial school in Glin or in Limerick. They were being sent out as slaves. The Christian Brothers were pocketing the money for the first 3 years they were working. The boys got nothing. You have to understand, these boys had absolutely nothing. They were the most vulnerable in the country. And these are the documents that they were showing. You can read there what it says. It's important to read it.
It's for a Miles Daly from Glin.
Right. He's a pupil of the industrial school.
Became an apprentice to learn his art. And the terms... It's a slave contract, Tom.
It's a slave contract. He's tied down. He can't get married. He can't play in a pub. He can't
That's
play
medieval.
cards,
That's
they can't play
medieval
golf.
stuff. Yeah.
Yes, and his wages have to be handed over to the manager of the industrial school. So here you have a situation where they're being totally exploited. They were paid and now they're paid for his wages. These boys had nothing. They were from the poorest sections of society. And here they are being traded out, not even allowed to earn their own money.
Washing, lodging repairs. He wasn't allowed to visit taverns
Yeah,
or alehouses or playhouses, or absent himself from his said masters.
that's right. They're slave.
Day or night,
Yeah.
he's bound to them.
They can't divulge his master's secret. While they were saying here you had them operating a slave trade behind the scenes.
He shall not contract matrimony within the said term. Wasn't allowed to get married. Shall not play at cards, dice, tables, or any unlawful games where he is said master's apprentice. He shall neither buy nor sell. There was nothing that is medieval slave contract words.
You can read it. Anybody in their right mind would know that's a slave contract.
That's a slave contract.
Yes. So this is what was going on with children from the industrial schools. And obviously, these posed a problem for the Christian Brothers. These had survived the fires. This is what we were burning. We were burning boxes. The other thing we found in the boxes was letters, parents trying to contact their children. They were not being delivered. They were all being destroyed. The parents weren't able to contact children. Children trying to write letters out. All the letters were being collected and not sent. And there was no communication between the families and the children. And
Tom, you found a letter from your aunt to you.
That's correct. This is what I found extraordinary. At the stage this letter was written, I was actually employed by the Christian Brothers. I was being paid.
You were being paid.
And still they wouldn't give me my letters.
Give your letters.
And all the other letters from the boys were on the same box as well for burning. Their parents couldn't.
You found this to your aunt.
This was
years after she wrote it, Tom.
I got it 40 years later.
And would you like to read the letter to
I would, yes. It's from Maggie Lysett. She was in a Magdalen laundry, the Good Shepherd's Convent in Limerick.
In Limerick.
My dear nephew, I am now writing to you, ask you, could you send me a small transistor? And I will send you on the money every week, as I would love to have one when I go to bed every evening, a small one. I know you will not forget me. You were very kind to me, as my brother and sister never write to me at Easter. I hope they are not sick. So will you write and tell me, Thomas, then I will not be going there to Foynes in June for holidays. So you will call for me and bring me home to see my new home. So hope all in Shanagolden are well. They never write to me. And Joe never called to see me since he came to Limerick. So this is all until you write to me. So goodbye and God bless from your Auntie Maggie to Thomas.
That's the photocopy you have there.
I see a photocopy of the letter. And these were never delivered.
And that's her handwriting.
That's her handwriting there, you know. And this isn't the only letter. There was boxes. The letters are in the boxes as well.
And there could have been more to you.
The other boys were getting letters from parents. They were not being delivered. Now letters. There was one letter there from a boy that went to work in Castle Island for a farmer, and he implored his brother at the school to ask the superior for an overcoat that he was freezing where he was working. The Christian Brothers would have had no problem giving him an overcoat, as did a tailor's workshop worked by boys at the school. The letter was never delivered. It was thrown in the box.
So, Tom, you were taken to court over this. How did that happen? What happened?
The Christian Brothers pressurized to get the documents. I refused to let them.
Yep.
They then threatened court action. At that stage, I panicked. So I went to my local TD, Niall Collins, to have the matter raised in Dáil Éireann at government buildings, to alert the government about these documents, to claim the documents. Niall Collins alerted the Minister for Education, Richard Bruton, on the matter. They alertified the Department of Education to try and get these documents. They stated that they had no connection with those documents, that as far as they were concerned, they were private documents held by the congregation. No one from the state came to see the documents, that they weren't private documents. They were letters written from parents, children. They were not the property of the Christian Brothers. The Christian Brothers proceeded and took me to court in Limerick, and I was ordered by the judge, 14 days, all documents were to be handed over to the Christian Brothers.
Including the letter?
Yes, and that's why I kept my own letter. And the documents were handed back to the Christian Brothers. Now, the Christian Brothers claimed in court that the superior that was over the Glin Industrial School did not have the authority to give me documents or to destroy documents. That was their claim. They wanted the documents for their archives because they want to help past pupils who might be looking for further information about their thing. The whole thing is a farce. I cannot understand that for the life of me, how any organization involved in child abuse, starving children, beating children, sexually abusing children should hold their records. But here in Ireland, the Christian Brothers, who have been found guilty of serious abuse of children sexually, emotionally, and physically, are still allowed to hold our records. I was raped by a Christian brother. Still they have my records. And they are allowed to hold them by this state. It's the only country I know of where an organization that has been brought for abuse of children can still own and control the records of the children they abused. And there's a religious congregation in the Catholic Church here in Ireland. And it's totally wrong that anybody involved in child abuse should hold records of children.
Totally wrong, Tom.
It's wrong. It's wrong. You can't make it right. Since the publication of the Ryan report, it should have been very obvious to everyone in authority that the Christian Brothers should be no longer holding records of children that they seriously abused in industrial schools. That has never been properly addressed, and it continues on. And
that court case cost you a lot of money, didn't it, Tom?
It cost me €9,500
and you got nothing
out of my pocket. I had to raise the money and pay the solicitors for the court case. And that's what I got out of it. I was the only survivor of an industrial school that the Christian Brothers prosecuted and took to court for the claiming ownership of the documents. All I was doing was to save the documents from as they wanted to destroy them and have them saved and protected for generations to come, that they were there as living proof of what actually happened.
They're trying to hide it and keep it from the public, and you can't do that, Tom. The truth always comes out. And it will come out, Tom. It will yes. Come out. And future generations will know what happened.
But the difficulty I have is when they hand over their records to the state eventually, they're only going to hand over what they want to hand over. That's the difficulty I have, that these documents were proof beyond reasonable doubt. Otherwise, these could be denied that this never happened. But here was a positive proof, contracts that were signed. And that was important to me, that would be preserved and held in archives.
And this heading here, brothers made cash out of apprenticeships.
Exactly.
That's what this
should have been paid for 3 years.
But listen, Tom, the good news is that the Christian Brothers have had their day. Everybody is on to them now.
Yeah.
They're well known for what they did.
Yes.
You know, they can't continue doing what they were doing.
Yes. But how can a religious congregation within the Catholic Church still hold records that they're sexually abused? It's beyond me. It's mind-boggling. I can't understand that.
To understand, but you've got to remember the power of the Catholic Church, Tom.
Yes.
And you can't fight it because they're too powerful, they're too wealthy, and they're too much in control.
Yes. I think it will take another generation.
Maybe 2 generations.
2 generations before this thing is completely, people get a fair hearing. wherever they are, because up
There
to
will,
now.
Tom. It will happen. It will. It has to. It will happen.
But we'll be,
It will.
unfortunately, we'll be gone. You know, I believe we were born 100 years too soon. You know, that was the problem.
So you'll be fighting from up there, Tom, you'll be.
But will it,
Sticking the knife in from up there, won't you?
Well, there's one thing for sure, we're all going to heaven, because hell is packed. No one can get in. All the devils are here.
Tom, your story is so sad and so harrowing. I don't know how you are still alive or how you've managed to survive this, Tom.
Yes.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
No, it's been a pleasure.
Does it help every time you talk about it? Does it help you, Tom, in some way?
I found it. I thought it was my duty that I should write a book on it, because I think, except it's documented, people in future generations will want to know exactly what went on in those institutions, and they want to hear it from somebody that was in the institution, not hearing it from drip drab. And that's how, the only way is somebody that was there, that went through the whole lot, between the starvation, the beatings, the sex abuse that went on.
First-hand evidence, right?
Yeah.
And I'll just hold your book up again, Tom, to see, let people see. There is Tom's book, The Boy from Glin Industrial School. It's on Amazon. It's a beautiful book. And you talk about, you also met President Higgins, didn't you? You were down in Ireland.
Yes.
Yes.
I was invited up to Áras an Uachtaráin with two presidents, President Mary McAleese. It was fantastic that after all these years, it was a recognition of what happened, that at last the truth could be told and believed. And the president invited us up, and it was a day we'll never forget. I was invited later up to the Áras an Uachtaráin with Michael D. Higgins, and had a wonderful time up there. And I think it puts beyond doubt, and for survivors, that their story is finally told, and that people will have to accept what went on there, because for so long everything was denied. We were told we were exaggerating, that couldn't happen, that wouldn't happen. It happened in Ireland, and that is a fact.
And you've certainly done your part in getting that story out there, Tom.
That's right.
And look, you're a lovely wee child. Look,
That's
you're
right.
Lovely. There's a picture of the wee blonde curls. No, you're a lovely child.
That's right.
And once again, Tom, thank you very much for sharing your story.
Yes, well, delighted to be here. I think it's important the truth is told.
It will be told. It's all coming out.
Yeah.
And thank you all for watching. And until we meet again, Slán agus Beannacht.